Good morning, everyone. We're continuing. We're in the very last article of the Ananda Way of Life, Guidelines of Conduct for members of the Ananda Sevaka order. Let's say a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. We were born for one purpose, which is to live in thy light, to overflow with thy joy, and to share thy consciousness with all. Help us to extricate ourselves from the confusing cross currents of the material world, that we may see your guiding ray of light in the midst of everything, and have the clarity and the courage to walk where you lead. Om. Peace. Amen. So, this is Article 17, the community as home. So before it says, members should consider the interests of the members as a whole as their own interests, and they should view Ananda as their own true spiritual home. They should treat community property as their own property and see Ananda as their spiritual family. Then the next paragraph says, on a higher level of awareness, they should see their Ananda family, property, and communal interests all as belonging to God alone. Now, this is a very interesting sort of line that a Dwapara Yuga monastic order has to follow, because what happens with ideas like that is if the institution begins to wander from its essential purpose, and its own perpetuation and convenience begins to become a major thread in the way it expresses itself, then imposing the will of God, or declaring that this is the will of God, is is a shortcut to getting everybody to do what you want to do, and what you want them to do, and what is the force that's directing that. Now, Ananda is very fresh and very new in its development. Swami Kriyananda passed less than a decade ago. Jyotish and Devi, who have essentially stepped into his leadership role, Jyotish as his spiritual successor, and the two of them as leading the community, spent a lifetime with Swami Kriyananda. So we are still essentially emanating from the divine source. Because this is a rising age rather than a falling age, all of our history of spiritual institutions has been through Kali Yuga. And so we have a tendency to sort of impose Kali Yuga inevitability on a situation to which it no longer applies, because every year going forward, we're moving into a more and more, a greater state of awareness globally rather than a lesser. But there's still this institutional concern, because most things, are born, they flower, they flourish, and then they gradually fade. That's just the way of this world. Nothing lasts forever. And spiritual institutions seem to have a shelf life also. Now, I'm not in any way saying that Ananda is anywhere near that, but Swami wrote this for a very long time. So on a higher level of awareness, they should see that Ananda family, property, and all communities, all as belonging to God alone, which is to say, Swami's trying to find a way to bring the divine authority, so to speak, or the divine clarity into our relationship, even to the material reality of Ananda, but picking it up from the right string. Not that God is running this, and if your superior knows what he's doing, not like that, but just more like we're all moving together. We're stewards. We're not owners. We're stewards of all of this for the sake of the divine, and everything that we're doing is for the possibility of our experiencing God behind it. Everything is about individual expanding consciousness. Ananda, we come together as a spiritual family to realize God and to serve our fellow God in our fellow man. That's why we're here. Ananda itself is here to serve that purpose. Ananda itself is not the purpose. And this is what he's trying to get us to say. Behind all of it that we're calling community property, what we're really trying to relate to, each of us individually, is the presence of God in it all. It's a very challenging teaching. It's not like it's just a simple idea, because our relationships are individual, but our personalities are multitudinous. And it's a very fine art to be able to knit together all the various human elements, and keeping in mind always, on a higher level behind it all, it's God alone. In God's name, above all, members should view every life form, the plants, the soil, one another, outsiders, and even those outsiders who oppose them in their way of life, with divine respect. It's just such a sweet way to put it, isn't it? And once again, there's nothing in here that says we are the elect. We are the chosen of God because we are disciples of this master, because we practice Kriya, because we know about self-realization, because Swami knew Yogananda and I knew Swami, whatever it might be. Swami wants us, he's not in any way giving us license to set ourselves apart from all of creation. In fact, just the opposite. In God's name, meaning because all of this is divinely created. It's not that the earth has a special destiny that we have to be responsible for, but that Divine Mother is animating all of it. Even in our affection and love for nature, Swamiji wrote, see, the way Swami worked, he worked the way Master worked, but I'm more familiar with how Swami did things. He didn't have to write a huge treatise on something. He would plant the essence of what he had to say in something very simple. So there was a time when he was really wanting to speak to Ananda's right relationship to the natural world. So he wrote the song, it's called Channels, and it's about us being channels for the power of the divine as it expresses through the natural world. And the song Channels celebrates trees, rivers, mountains, flowers, birds, stars. There's 6 parts to it. And each of those verses speaks of essentially what the divine message is behind. Trees standing firm show the secret of inner power. Give us, when tested, strength to endure. Stars send a message of light through eternity. My mind goes, stars send a message. So Lord, when in darkness, thy radiance I see. Flowers so soft and fragile, stay fragrant though pressed to the ground. May we thus learn forbearance, for in kindness love is found. And those are 3 of them, but you can see that it's not like we worship the flower, but the flower was created as a symbol, and the way the flower expresses itself will help us to be more devoted to God and to be closer to God. And we express gratitude to the messenger. And then the chorus is, Mother, we thank thee. Your joy shines in everything. Open these channels that the world once more may sing. Now that is, Swami is also addressing the problem. And the problem is that the world doesn't see the divine in the natural world anymore. But Swami's, Mother, we thank you, is not Mother Nature. It's not nature that he's speaking to. He's speaking to the divine expressing through nature. So our attention is always going to God alone. And that just lifts it, that extra little movement that keeps us focused right where we ought to be. And then if we participate, as for example Joseph Cornell, who's a lifelong member of Ananda, has done, his entire life work has been to help people understand the right relationship with the natural world, and he's had a magnificent global impact. And he's never talked about necessarily about Master's teaching or about his life at Ananda, but he's taken what Swami said and translated it into that reality. So he's taken on that ecological responsibility, but from the point of view of God alone. And he's just one example of the many things that are possible if we pick it up from the right string. So that song of Swamiji's we sing it as 6-part harmony, and it's a wonderful community song. There's just many aspects to it, but it was very, very serious and contains within it the entire description of the Ananda way of life in regard to nature, so deep and so huge that, Joseph, whom we call Bharat, has done, you can make a whole life out of it if you want to. And so he's trying to get us also to say, in God's name, above all, members should view every life form. And so he starts with the natural world, the plants, the soil, which is a living entity, and upon which all of human life depends, everything on the planet, all the living force on the planet, as it was dramatically described, depends on a few inches of topsoil. And it's a living organism for which we should be expressing gratitude every day instead of just disregarding it as if it all belongs to us. In God's name, we should be thinking that. And then, of course, he goes to one another. And then he goes beyond the community. We don't just love the community. He said, in other contexts, Swami has said, the power of the spiritual community is that it teaches us how to love. But the purpose of the spiritual community is not just to love itself. It's to learn how to love so that we can love everything. So he says, we love one another. This is my spiritual family. Outsiders, those people who don't live in the community. And then even those outside the community who oppose our way of life. And we have been already in our brief history severely persecuted by people outside the community. As it happened, the modern day persecution is often through litigation. So we got to go through 12 years of litigation. But Swami says even the outsiders who, Swami always used the phrase self-styled opponents or self-defined opponents. He would never call them opponents or enemies or detractors even. He would always call them self-styled, which is it was their choice to put themselves in that position. He didn't see them that way. And then he uses the word with divine respect. The word respect is very interesting. Whenever Swamiji has talked about marriage, any kind of romantic partnerships, people become infatuated with the word love, which is quite natural. But Swamiji has emphasized that the real enduring power in any friendship or any relationship is respect. He said love is a feeling that sometimes kind of comes and goes. But if you truly respect the people that you're close to, he said that your friendship and your positive relationship with them can endure. he said this most dramatically. There was this story is written up in my book about Swami Kriyananda. Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him. This woman had been in a long relationship with her husband, and he became infatuated with someone else. He didn't really conduct an affair, but his attention wandered to another woman, and it was a terrible strain on the relationship. But she felt that it was a passing infatuation, and that if she just simply stayed with him, that their relationship could transcend the distraction, which in fact proved to be true. And she was working very nobly. She really, in her heart of hearts, did not feel that they were meant to separate. And so she just held to that thought, but it was naturally hard on her. But at a certain point, she went to Swami and she said, I have the feeling that my husband doesn't respect me anymore. It was very interesting. Swami had encouraged her to stay with him, to just weather the storm and come out the other side. But when she went and said, I don't think he respects me anymore, Swami said, oh, well, then you'll have to leave him. And in the context, it was really dramatic. You know, it's like you can live with him being infatuated with someone else. You can get through that because these things come and go. But if he's genuinely lost respect for you, then what is the basis of friendship after this? Fortunately, what she chose to do was to tell him what she was feeling and to tell him what Swami said. And it was in many ways a very positive turning point because he was absolutely shocked and horrified that she would even imagine for a moment that he didn't respect her. Even in that tempestuous moment, he was honest enough to have tremendous respect for her for sticking with him, even though he was being such a naughty boy at that particular time. But respect he had in abundance. And that became the basis. So this is how, and also, we respect each other. You can respect each other ideally for the character that you see manifested in front of you. But we can also respect each other because we're all children of the divine. And it's not like I respect your behavior or anything that you're doing right now, but I respect the divinity within you, which inevitably will triumph over whatever ignorance you're presenting. Now, in closer relationships, respect it's more helpful if the respect is also applied to the person. But that's not what I'm talking about at great length here. But always holding respect. And you can hold respect for, you know, I don't agree with you, but I recognize that you're doing the best you can. Swami famously remarked once about someone who was struggling in the job they were doing, and there was some discussion about whether they should be removed from that position. And Swami said, well, actually, I think they're doing very well, considering who they are, which has become sort of a joke in the community. It's like, I think you're doing very well, considering who you are. So those people who choose to oppose you, they're doing the best they can, considering who they are. And what difference does it make to us? If we, as Swami said, because he was quite severely tested in this area by people that he had been very close to, turned on him quite fiercely, I would even say viciously, and did their very best to just denigrate every good intention he had. And let me just hold the thought, what I was trying to say. So he had to really find ways to maintain and not get sucked down by it. And he said, if I turned against them, he said, I would lose twice. I've already lost their friendship. He said, but if I allow myself to become negative toward them, he said, I will have lost even more, because then my consciousness will be changed. And he said, so therefore I choose to love. Just like that. I choose to love. But as he said, if you hold your hand out to someone and they repeatedly just bat it down with anger, he said after a while, you keep your hands in your pockets. Because he was very practical. It's like there's not going to be a reconciliation, but I can just respect them as children of God doing the best they can do. And this is how Swami says, this is how we love each other in spiritual community. We don't love each other because you're nice. We don't love each other because, you behave the way I think people ought to behave. We don't love each other because we vibe so much the same. We like all the same things, like this. We love each other because we respect each other, because we're all children of God doing our best. And everything in creation, the plants, the soil, we're all an expression of the divine consciousness. Is it easy to hold that point of view? No. But that's the whole point. That is the whole point. We're here to transform our consciousness, not just to continue as we've always been. Those who are following the Ananda way of life should consider it their duty to others of lesser vision to help to uplift whenever they can, and when they cannot, to bless them from afar. Those who are following the Ananda way of life should consider it their duty to others of lesser vision to help to uplift them whenever they can, and when they cannot, to bless them from afar. So these are things to apply sensitively. In other words, we're all responsible for each other here. And we have to just do what we can if there is receptivity to it. I've been in a long discussion with someone recently about, just watching friends make decisions that seem like they're not in their best interest, but they're too committed. They're deeply committed. There's no receptivity to another point of view. See, I've watched Swami go through this a lot of different times where, let me think how to say it. He would see that decisions were being made that were going to have unfortunate consequences. They were going to cause, decisions were being made by various individuals, and those decisions would not bring the happiness that the individuals hoped they would. But Swami would test the water. There was one man who went on a course of action and he followed it for 10 years, which took him far away from our communities. But fortunately, he stayed close to Swami, and Swamiji stayed in touch with him, and every time they would come together, and I was almost always a witness to it, Swami would start a conversation, and the conversation would be to explore the degree of this person's receptivity to another point of view. And he would always start by seeing if there was any receptivity, and for many years there was no receptivity. Then Swami would shift, and he would genuinely try to give good advice for the person to just keep going in the direction they were going, to just keep working on what they were working on. And Swami would genuinely try to help them, be successful in what they were trying to do. Because above all, Swami wanted to preserve the friendship. He wanted this man to always feel that Swami was his friend. And after close to 10 years, there was finally a moment when Swami started his exploration, and the man said, I'm thinking of just dropping what I'm doing and returning to Ananda. And Swami said, I think that would be a good idea. And that's all he said. Not a word. And he never even gave another word. I think that would be a good idea. But that would never have happened if Swamiji had taken any less seriously his responsibility to help this man expand his vision. So what you have to understand, and what I'm trying to use by that example, and that is a glorious example of what I witnessed over and over and what I saw him do to me as well. Well, if you're set on that direction and you're not going to hear my advice, I'm still your friend. I still love you. I still respect you. So we'll just take this ride together. Because staying in our lives as a trusted friend and advisor is the most important thing. Whatever wave we're riding, we'll just ride it and it'll crash and whatever happens. But if we're still connected to this inspiring vision that Swami would give us, then we'll be fine in the end. And I speak from decades of experience, and I was fine in the end. I was pretty wonky at various stages, but I was fine in the end because he held on, because it was his duty to help me. Because I am definitely a person of lesser vision by comparison, but how that is expressed is everything. You can't just beat somebody into submission, force them to believe you, especially not when we're talking about something so subtle as our own consciousness. I mean, the reality of it is it's vibrational, and if you can't see it, you can't see it. I mean, I can look back on my own life, and I'm sure all of you can too. It's just you can't know it until you know it. And then you look back and see often how many times people tried to tell you. I know decades ago a friend of mine made an unfortunate, what I thought was an unfortunate marriage. And before she did it, I sort of said, are you sure about this? This does not seem like a very good idea. Anyway, it turned out to be not a very good idea. And as it fell apart, and when she finally was separated, she said to me, "Why didn't you say something to me?" "Oh, but I did." I told her exactly where we were when I spoke. But it was just like, it was another language, went right over her head. But I didn't lose the friendship. I'd learned enough by that point not to drive the point home. Okay, it'll just be a wave, we'll ride this wave. Now, in this case, we were peers. I wouldn't call my friend a person of lesser vision. But in that moment, her discrimination was a little clouded. But this is the way it is, and I've seen it with myself. I've made many choices and decisions, but Swami just stuck with me. And when I came out of the woods, he was just there. "Oh, I think that would be a good idea." With no blame, nothing. But this is a serious part of what we do here in life. We're all Divine Mother's instruments. And the Mother is there to take us through our childhood, which we're always in, regardless, until we're God realized, to take us through our childhood, to take us to final awareness. And it is a responsibility. And if people don't want what we have to give them, which very, very often they don't, we can still love them and we can still bless them. A prayer that I have found to be very useful is, "Divine Mother, whatever it is you're trying to teach them, why don't you help them learn it?" Sometimes I add, give them the receptivity, the humility, and the wisdom to learn it. And that has been my way often of blessing people that I'm not able to communicate with in any other way. I mean, it's not always their fault, it's often mine. Perhaps my own emotions are too involved. But I can still say, "Divine Mother, whatever it is that they have to learn, help them to learn it." And of course that prayer reverses nicely to self. "Divine Mother, whatever it is you're trying to teach me, give me the receptivity, the humility, and the wisdom to learn it." God bless you, my friends.